The story of the Atlantean, the sons of the Law of One. Over time, with the advent of civilization and technology, the divisions between the Adamic and pre-Adamic races became increasingly more apparent. Whereas the Adamic race held on to the belief in the one God who had specially created them, the pre-Adamic race refuted the belief in the existence of God, instead focusing on the acquisition of wealth and power, worshipping the creature rather than the creator. As these differences became more and more clear, the world came to be divided into two basic divisions: the sons of the Law of One, those who held to the belief in the one God as the creator of the universe and of mankind, and the sons of Belial, those who denied the existence of God and instead worshipped themselves. Casey explained it thus: in Atlantean land during those periods of early rise of sons of Belial as oppositions that became more and more materialized as the powers were applied for self-aggrandizement. This self-aggrandizement took the form of the accumulation of wealth and power into the hands of a very few, with the result being extreme social stratification, where perhaps only a few dozens or hundreds of beings ruled over millions of slaves. This situation, of course, was unacceptable to the sons of the Law of One. We find that in those periods there was not a laboring for the sustenance of life, as in the present, but rather individuals who were children of the Law of One, and some who were the children of Belial, in the early experience, were served by automatons, or things, that were retained by individuals or groups to do the labors of a household, or to cultivate the fields or the like, or to perform the activities of artisans. And it was concerning these things about which much of the disturbing forces grew to be factors to be reckoned with, between the children of the Law of One and the sons of Belial. Much like the issue of slavery which, in the 19th century, sparked off a bloody civil war in America, this division over the treatment of these slaves, among other things, appears to have touched off a civil conflict in Atlantis which led to the first destruction of Atlantis. While the sons of the Law of One were busy developing tools of mass instruction about God and his plans for mankind, the sons of Belial had been hard at work developing weapons of mass destruction in order to enslave mankind. In Atlantean land at the time of withdrawing from the Law of One, establishment of sons of Belial the entity, was a priestess in temple built in opposition to the sons of the Law of One, during time when there was the creating of the high influence of radioactivity from rays of the sun that were turned on crystals in the pits that made connections with internal influences of the earth. From the sound of this, it appears that in Atlantis, the peaceful coexistence, and possible intermarriage, between the sons of the Law of One and the children of Belial ceased, and two distinct factions developed. The sons of Belial had apparently tired of the compassionate, humanistic approach of the sons of the Law of One and, instead of using their technological prowess to help benefit mankind, tried to use it to conquer the world. The Atlanteans, both the sons of the Law of One and the children of Belial, had developed a high technology using crystals and solar energy that they used to create electrical power for lighting, heating, travel, and related needs. The sons of Belial, however, broke ranks with the sons of the Law of One and attempted to use that technology as a weapon. According to Casey, the children of Belial had actually developed that technology to the point where they were able not only to harness the power of the sun, but of the volcanic forces of the earth itself. However, they foolishly underestimated the power that they unleashed, and instead of releasing themselves from the yoke of the law of one and conquering the world, they instead brought destruction on themselves, and great damage to the island of Atlantis in the process. In Atlantean land during those periods when there were the destruction or separations of the land. During the period of the first destruction, the entity was, among those who aided in the preparation of the explosives or those things that set in motion the fires of the inner portions of the earth that were turned into destructive forces. The children of Belial attempted to harness the volcanic forces of the earth in order to defeat the power of the sons of the law of one, and enslave mankind, but they instead brought great destruction to the island of Atlantis. As a result of their arrogance, they released forces that they were unable to completely control, and the resulting release of volcanic energy resulted in the division of the island of Atlantis into several lesser islands, with a substantial portion of the island falling into the sea. The use of these devices by the sons of Belial brought, then, the first of the upheavals, or the turning of the rays from the sun, as used by the sons of the law of one, into the crystal for the activities of same, produced what we would call a volcanic upheaval, and the separating of the land into several islands, 5 in number. Posidia then became one of these islands. This, then, was the end of the first age of Atlantis. A topographical map of the Azores, a chain of islands in the central Atlantic, in the same location Casey had placed the main island of Atlantis that remained after the first destruction, which he referred to as Posidia. Note that topography is much higher than the surrounding ocean floor, much more closely resembles above-ground areas on the Earth. Theorists believe that volcanic pressures under the mid-Atlantic ridge were greatly reduced as a result of Atlanteans tapping into their energies, resulting in the entire island sinking beneath the waves. Great Atlantis had been greatly damaged, but not destroyed by the arrogance of power displayed by the sons of Belial. The majority of the original continent remained, though it was now separated into 5 lesser islands, the greatest of which was the island of Posidia. It was here that the sons of the law of one remained steadfast in their beliefs in God and their mission to serve mankind. Having been proven clearly right by the disastrous failure of the children of Belial, the sons of the law of one continued developing technologies for the betterment of mankind. In Atlantean land during those periods of greater expansion as to ways, means and manners of applying greater conveniences for the people of the land, things of transportation, the aeroplane, as called today, but then as ships of the air, for they sailed not only in the air but in other elements also. These technological advancements allowed the sons of the law of one to develop ships that would allow them to travel through the air, on the land, and under the water, just as we have today. Moreover, they also had developed forms of wireless communications just the same as we have developed today. In City of Pios, in Atlantis, among people who gained understanding of application of night side of life or negative influences in the Earth's spheres, of those who gave much understanding to the manner of sound, voice and picture and such to peoples of that period. In Posidia the entity dwelt among those that had charge of the storage of the motivative forces from the great crystals that so condensed the lights, the forms of the activities, as to guide the ships in the sea and in the air and inconveniences of the body as television and recording voice. The level of technology of Atlantis even after the first destruction was roughly the same as it is today, including television, radio, and probably the same type of home entertainment systems as are available today. Their ability to travel was also the same as that used today, including rapid forms of air, land and sea travel. In fact, for all intents and purposes, Atlantis at its peak was probably nearly indistinguishable from the America of the present day, including the social and cultural divisions we are currently experiencing with the rise of immorality. The Atlanteans were becoming decadent, or being broken up owing to the disputes between the children of the Law of One and the children of Belial. The level of technology available to the average person at that time was impressive, and apparently the technology was available for a good long time, as the period before the first and second destruction of Atlantis was roughly 40,000 years, according to Casey's timeline. However, as it is today, technology invariably finds its way into military uses, and the children of Belial, having forgotten the lessons of the past, again began experimenting with forbidden technologies from the night side of life, what we would today call the dark side. Casey often mentioned in his visions powerful crystals through which tremendous energies were harnessed. He also frequently mentioned the military uses that these technologies were frequently put to, uses which went far beyond self-defense to clearly offensive and intrusive purposes, in Atlantean land at time of development of electrical forces that dealt with transportation of craft from place to place, photographing at a distance, reading inscriptions through walls even at a distance, overcoming gravity itself, preparation of the crystal, the terrible mighty crystal. Much of this brought destruction. Before the second destruction, when there was the dividing of the islands, when the temptations were begun in activities of sons of Belial and children of Law of One entity among those that interpreted the messages received through the crystals and the fires that were to be the eternal fires of nature. The entity that Casey was receiving his information from was once one of the sons of Belial, who once again began using the crystal technology for offensive purposes. Like our modern satellites, these techniques could see over long distances, even through solid barriers, and could even deliver energy over long distances, for constructive or destructive purposes. The whole Atlantean power structure was apparently based upon one or more of these giant crystals, which the Atlanteans referred to as the Firestone. About the Firestone, the entity's activities then made such applications as dealt both with the constructive as well as destructive forces in that period. It would be well that there be given something of a description of this so that it may be understood better. The Firestone was housed in the center of a building which would today be said to be lined with non-conductive stone. The building above the stone was oval, or a dome wherein there could be a portion for rolling back, so that the activity of the stars, the concentration of energies that emanate from bodies that are on fire themselves, along with elements that are found and not found in the Earth's atmosphere. The concentration through the prisms or glass, as it acted upon the instruments that were connected with the various modes of travel through induction methods which made much their same character of control as would in the present day be termed remote control through radio vibrations or directions, though the kind of force impelled from the stone acted upon the motivating forces in the crafts themselves. The building was constructed so that when the dome was rolled back there might be little or no hindrance in the direct application of power to various crafts that were to be impelled through space, whether within the radius of vision or whether directed underwater or under other elements, or through other elements. These, then, were impelled by the concentration of rays from the stone which was centered in the middle of the power station, or powerhouse, as would be the term in the present. Not only did the ancient Atlanteans have air, land and sea craft, as well as the ability to communicate with that craft via television and radio, but they even had the ability to transmit energy to the engines of these craft through the ether via these crystal firestones. Like the methods Nikola Tesla would reinvent thousands of years later, the Atlanteans were able to transmit energy through the air, without the benefit of wires. However, once again, the sons of Belial, true to nature, began to use this high technology for destructive purposes, in Atlantean land during those periods when there were those determining as to whether there would be the application of the laws of the children of one or of sons of Belial in turning into destructive channels those influences of infinite power as were being gained from the elements as well as from what is termed spiritual or supernatural powers in the present. Entity wavered between choices, and when the destruction came about by the use of those rays as were applied for beneficial forces, entity misapplied ability. Once again the children of Belial were on the brink of destroying Atlantis, and the sons of the Law of One decided that it was finally time to begin leaving Atlantis, before the inevitable destruction came. In Atlantean land during the periods of Exodus due to foretelling or foreordination of activities which were bringing about destructive forces. Among those who were not only in Yucatan but in the Pyrenees and Egyptian land, Casey's visions spoke of exoduses to a number of places, most particularly South and Central America, Spain, and Egypt, as well as North America, in the area of Nevada and Colorado, which at that time was called Mara. Not long after these exoduses began, another great destruction, the second great destruction of Atlantis occurred, and the islands became even smaller and more divided than before. Many of the Law of One, and some of Belial, however, had already begun building up new homes in the more stable lands surrounding Atlantis, a colonial period that would characterize the last great age of Atlantis before its final destruction. More than half of Casey's life readings concerning Atlantis cover this period of Atlantis history, a period that covers approximately 10,500 to 9,500 BC, near the end of which time the final destruction of Atlantis and the Great Flood of Noah occurred. Casey believed that he had an incarnation during this period in the form of an Egyptian priest named Ra-Ta, who was renowned for his ability to communicate with the Atlanteans who had invaded the land of Egypt in force, after the final destruction of their homeland. And, as we shall see, once again the warring factions of the sons of the Law of One and the children of Belial continued on during the Egyptian sojourn. 1,000 years or more before the final destruction of Atlantis, which did not occur until somewhere between 10,500 and 9,500 BC, many of the Law of One had emigrated away from Posidia and the other islands of Atlantis wherein they had dwelt for so many thousands of years. They traveled to many places, including North America, in that portion that is now the desert Southwest, Central America in the area of the Yucatan, South America to the area around Peru and Europe around the Pyrenees area of Spain and France. However, by far the largest single contingent of Atlantean refugees came to North Africa, particularly to the area now known as Egypt. The Egyptian sojourn was somewhat different for the Sons of the Law of One than their experiences in battling the forces of darkness on their home island of Posidia. As the last remnants of Posidia and the rest of the islands of Atlantis began to slip beneath the waves as a result of the children of Belial's unceasing warfare, more and more of the Law of One decided that they would best be able to serve mankind from other, more stable locations around the earth. However, Egypt, though it was geophysically stable, was undergoing a socio-political earthquake. Edgar Evans Casey explains the situation in Egypt around the time of the final destruction. From between 10,000 and 11,000 BC, tribes from the Carpathian region invaded and conquered Egypt. One of the leaders of this tribe was a priest named Rata. Rata was Edgar Casey, or Edgar Casey was Rata, depending upon your point of view. In Egypt, Rata's religious teachings attracted a large following. However, there was already political friction in Egypt and tension between the ruling classes and the native Egyptians. Rata was caught up in this political intrigue, and after a native rebellion, he was banished for 9 years to what is now Abyssinia. At the height of the confusion, refugees began arriving in Egypt from Atlantis. The Atlanteans, scientifically more advanced than the Egyptians, found little in common with the inhabitants of Egypt, and began to set up their old way of life. Leaders of the ruling class and leaders of the native rebellion soon realized that these incoming Atlanteans with their superior scientific knowledge and radically different social and religious views posed a new threat. A leader had to be found, around whom the people could rally, to turn the power of the Atlanteans into constructive channels. In an effort to bring some order out of the chaos, the leaders in power decided to recall the priest from banishment. Only he might correlate the activities of all these conflicting groups. This move was successful, and with the cooperation of the rulers of Egypt, the priest, the Atlanteans and the natives, there ensued a period of great advancement in human relations. The then civilized portions of the world enjoyed a period of moral, mental, spiritual and physical development. In order to accomplish this socio-political revolution and blend the three races together seamlessly, institutions were developed to help facilitate the movement towards consolidation. Combination hospital and educational institutions, called the Temple of Sacrifice and the Temple of Beauty, were set up, and probably functioned like the psychiatric wing of a modern hospital. There the masses flocked for mental as well as physical therapy. These institutions were needed both to heal the people both physically and psychologically. The Temple of Sacrifice focused on physical healing, including routine healings, surgeries, and even what appears to be radiation treatments and chemotherapy, where the Temple of Beauty focused on psychological healing, functioning as a combination psychiatric hospital/finishing school, helping heal mental illnesses and teach proper social behavior. However, they accomplished even more than this, as Edgar Evans Casey explains, evidently. Besides low mental development and a lack of moral judgment and self-control, some people classed as servants or things or automatons had physical deformities linking them to the animal world. They may have had tails, feathers, or scales. This was a holdover from the early projection of souls into materiality for selfish purposes, at which time monstrosities as well as creatures of beauty were created. All the trappings of civilization were added to the new blended culture, including social skills, education, a written language, a law code, electrical power for lighting, heating, and related needs, even recipes for Atlantean cuisine. However, even as the last remnants of Atlantis were sinking beneath the waves, the sons of Belial among the Atlanteans who had migrated to Egypt began once again to exercise their influence over the newly found institutions of health and healing, twisting their abilities to do evil. In Atlantean land, when groups were being sent to other lands for various purposes, among those coming to Egypt. With establishing of Temple of Sacrifice, entity set about to use truths and tenets that had been part of Atlantean experience, these used as suggestions with elements and drugs used as sedatives for activities in Temple of Sacrifice, or for surgery, in preparing individuals for definite services by removal of those things that would cause one to be different-minded. Though the wording here seems benign enough, the actual meaning of this statement is that the Egyptians were brainwashed into accepting Atlantean rule using coercive psychotherapy combined with drugs. Even worse, those subjects who refused to accept the new order had their brains surgically altered. In other words, they were lobotomized, their free will physically taken from them. In their desire for order, the Atlantean balance between the sons of the Law of One and the children of Belial again fell towards totalitarianism and, even though their intentions may have been noble, they began to treat other races as slaves once more. This tendency became more and more pronounced until they began to develop mechanical means of controlling, even enslaving, large masses of people at once. Edgar Evans Casey explains, with the use of chemical brain control agents it may be possible to control the individual and the masses, and to do this unobtrusively and without the active cooperation of the victims. The following extract sounds as if a similar technique was used in Atlantis. The entity was, among those that were set upon to apply their abilities in relationship to the various conditions that were to be brought about to impel a people to submit to the influences that might be brought to bear. Additional data in the reading indicates that electrical and mechanical appliances were used to accomplish this. So, even as their home islands of Atlantis were sinking beneath the waves, the sons of Belial were still trying to use every means necessary to conquer and enslave the world. The innocuous-sounding electrical and mechanical appliances actually indicates an extremely sinister agenda on the part of the sons of Belial, to turn everyone on Earth into remote-controlled slaves, even from birth. Shades of the Matrix. Edgar Evans Casey, writing his commentary on these visions in 1968, was surprisingly cogent in his assessment of the sinister implications contained in these statements. Someday tiny radios placed in the brain may make possible the enslavement of entire nations. Such equipment might be used to equip a child with a socket mounted under the scalp from which electrodes extended to selected areas of the brain. Later a miniature radio receiver and antenna could be plugged into the socket. Schaefer says, from that time on, the child's sensory perceptions and muscular activity could be either modified or completely controlled by bioelectric signals radiated from state-controlled transmitters. The once human being would be the cheapest of machines to create and operate. This statement sounds chillingly similar to what Morpheus said in The Matrix when explaining to Neo how mankind had become enslaved. What is the Matrix? Control. The Matrix is a computer-generated dream world built to keep us under control, in order to change the human being into this, and Morpheus holds up a battery. In the movie, mankind had been fitted with sockets in the base of their brains, and all over their bodies, and plugged into an extremely complex virtual reality program in order to keep them in a constant world of dreams, while their bodies were used as a source of heat and energy. In the world of the Matrix, humanity had been reduced to mere machines. In retrospect, it appears that the children of Belial had, in a desperate attempt to finally wipe out the power of the sons of the Law of One, chose a scorched earth, or in this case, a drowned earth, policy, where they once again tapped volcanic forces in an attempt to wipe out all of their enemies in one swift stroke. This is where Plato's account of the final destruction of Atlantis begins to converge with that of KC. The children of Belial apparently decided that they wanted either to control the entire world, or go down in glorious defeat, taking as many with them into the abyss as possible. There was no compromise, no attempts to improve mankind. In their minds, all other races were chattel to be used as cattle, and not even the powerful sons of the Law of One were going to keep them from their mad quest for dominion. As a result, they launched a final campaign on Europe to crush the last resistance to their rule, which, according to Plato, had fallen to the Athenians. Had the Athenians failed, and had God not intervened with the flood, the end result of this conquest could have been the enslavement of the entire human race, in a manner chillingly similar to that described in The Matrix. Having failed in their attempt to defeat the Athenian armies conventionally, the children of Belial turn once again to the terrible mighty crystal to annihilate the very ground on which the Athenians stood. Focusing the mighty power of the crystal into the bowels of the earth, the children of Belial succeeded in doing just that, sinking in the entire region that is now known as the Mediterranean basin into the depths of the sea along with the Athenians who had opposed them. However, the same process that destroyed the Athenian homelands also annihilated the remaining islands of Atlantis in a spectacular suicidal coup d'état. As Solon had put it, but afterwards there occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of misfortune all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis in like manner disappeared in the depths of the sea. It is in this context, then, that of a global war to end all wars, that Noah was commanded to build an ark, to save himself and those precious few others of the Law of One whose genetic structures had not been corrupted by intermarriage with the children of Belial. These 8 brave souls, along with the numerous animals that were also saved in the ark, rode out the massive flood that either accompanied or was outright caused by the disasters the children of Belial brought upon themselves in their quest to enslave the world. However, though the Bible says that the ancient world was corrupted by the giants and their constant warfare, it is clear that God himself had a hand in the destruction of the antediluvian world, as evidenced by the 40 days and 40 nights of rain, and the opening up of the fountains of the earth. Some believe that the disaster was actually caused by a polar shift due to the excessive amount of ice at the poles, which had made Earth top and bottom heavy, predisposing the crust to shift in order to compensate. Another possibility is that the antediluvian world was destroyed by a series of comet and/or meteor strikes that destroyed various land areas, and drowned many others with huge tidal waves and precipitation from the comet's melting ice. Most likely it was a combination of two or more of these, but the information we have currently available is simply not clear enough to draw a definitive conclusion. However, one thing is for certain: as a result of the Great Flood, the antediluvian world was well hidden and, based upon what we have discovered in this study, for good reason. Fortunately, the sons of the Law of One had foresight enough to compile all of their records in several places that were very difficult to destroy. The most well-known of these places, according to K.C., is Egypt, in Atlantean land before the final destruction, when the priest came from Egypt to Posidia to gain understanding of the Law of One, or God, that there might be records carried back to Egypt. Entity had charge of records brought to Egypt, and was one who personally cared for the records that were brought by the leaders of that people for preservation in that portion of man's experience in the earth. Entity aided the priest in the preparation of the manner of building the temple of records that lies just beyond that enigma. That still is the mystery of mysteries to those who seek to know what were the manners of thought of the ancient sons who made man, beast, as part of the consciousness. This mystery of mysteries is of course the Sphinx, which, as we have discussed in previous articles, is believed by many to be the guardian of an ancient hall of records as described by K.C. These records are located either under or near the Sphinx, between the Sphinx and the Pyramid of Records. As described by K.C., the entity was among the first to set the records that are yet to be discovered or yet to be ahead of those activities in the Atlantean land, and for the preservation of the data that is yet to be found from the chambers of the way between the Sphinx and the Pyramid of Records. K.C., unlike modern archaeologists, believes that the pyramids were built around 10,500 BC to house ancient information about the history of mankind, specifically about Atlantis. As we have seen, though the date of the building of the pyramids is probably the conventional dating of 2500 BC, the building of the Sphinx, based upon water erosion all over the Sphinx and the Sphinx enclosure, was most likely built around the time of the Atlanteans, ca. 10,500 BC. However, we will never be certain until the ancient Hall of Records is opened and the relevant information is deciphered. K.C. even gives detailed instructions on what the records are and where the Hall of Records can be found, a record of Atlantis from beginning of those periods when the spirit took form, or began the encasements in that land, and the developments of the peoples throughout their sojourn, together with the record of the first destruction, and the changes that took place in the land, with the record of the sojournings of the peoples and their varied activities in other lands, and a record of the meetings of all the nations of lands, for the activities in the destruction of Atlantis, and the building of the Pyramid of Initiation, together with whom, what and where the opening of the records would come, that are as copies from the sunken Atlantis. For with the change, Atlantis, must rise again. In position, this lies, as the sun rises from the waters, as the line of the shadows, or light, falls between the pores of the Sphinx, that was set later as the sentinel or garden which may not be entered from the connecting chambers from the Sphinx's right pore until the time has been fulfilled when the changes must be active in this sphere of man's experience. Then, It lies between the Sphinx and the river. Casey's Atlantis is quite enigmatic, but matches on many points with both the Bible and Plato's accounts of the ancient world. Though it is possible that Casey may have simply had an excellent imagination and sharp memory recall, some of the things he predicted, such as television, lasers, and atomic power, were not yet available at the time of his visions. Though purists would argue that a study of Casey in context of the Bible is only marginally useful, some of the information gleaned from his insights has, as we have seen, proven to be extremely enlightening. And even though the great flood of the ancient world wiped out all life on earth save that saved on the ark, records of the ancient world apparently still exist in various parts of the world. Moreover, and more interestingly, Casey said that only at a certain time, when the time has been fulfilled, can the secret chamber be entered again, and the Hall of Records found, with their precious cargo of truth. And when is that time? When Atlantis rises again, it would be well if this entity were to seek either of the three phases of the ways and means in which those records of the activities of individuals were preserved, the one in the Atlantean land that sank, which will rise and is rising again, another in the place of the records that leadeth from the Sphinx to the Hall of Records, in the Egyptian land, where the temple there is overshadowing same. It would take an act of God to open up the Hall of Records, given the extreme levels of control the Egyptian authorities have been exercising over all aspects of the Gizeh necropolis. Recently, as has been written about elsewhere in this issue, attempts have been made to open up a secret chamber in the Great Pyramid, which may have been the pyramid that Casey was referring to as the Pyramid of Records. Though the first attempt has met with mixed results, future attempts will likely open up new horizons in our understanding of ancient Egyptian culture and, hopefully, settle the Atlantis question once and for all. Yet, for those who have faith in history, fate, God, we know that someday soon, for good or ill, Atlantis will rise again.